Club Radio. Club Life Radio.
Check it out.
Drop it.
Welcome to Victory for Today. This is your host, Donald and Yvonne Taylor. I'd like to welcome you to an exciting discussion on how faith-based approaches to contemporary problems. Today, our guest is Miss Shai Brownlee. Shai come to us with extensive experience in education and social development. But before we get started, Yvonne, how are you doing today?
Donald, I'm doing just great. Thank you for asking.
Okay, good. What's our power of scripture for today?
Well, today we're going to read Proverbs, the 22nd chapter, and I'm going to read the 6th verse. Train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. Amen.
Good. Today, as I stated earlier, our guest is Miss Shai Brownlee. Shai, can you tell us about yourself?
Hi, thank you for having me today. I am a Phoenix, Arizona native. I have a few degrees. I have a bachelor in sociology, a master in business administration, and a Juris Doctorate. And while I am studying for the bar exam, I'm substitute teaching. My husband is getting his PhD in educational leadership, and he also has degrees in religious studies, in sociology and anthropology. So a lot of our at-home conversations involve contemporary problems in religion, in school districts, in society as a whole. And that has been a huge part of our relationship and our prayer life.
Okay. My concern for our previous discussions, we have talked about the changing role of the social conflict within schools, and how this new generation coming up is faced with many personal and social and peer conflicts that previous generations did not have to face. Could you describe some of those conflicts that you see as a teacher in the school system now?
There are several problems. We have the implementation of the now defunct No Child Left Behind Act. We have younger students who are not necessarily parents, but taking care of younger siblings as parents. We have parents who are disengaged, be it they are in prison, they are working several jobs, or they really just don't care about their children's education and choose not to participate. There's a huge push for parental involvement in the schools now, and we've always had certain social ills that spill into the schools, such as drugs, bullying, or different ills. However, it seems now that these problems have been magnified, and I believe they're being magnified because the students are so ill-equipped to handle things now.
So Shai, starting out, would you talk to me a little bit about the role of standardized tests and the Common Core and all of those different standards that they have for children that are in school, and how it is that with all of those different programs in place, children seem to be coming out of school not with basic foundational education, just not really being prepared to do much of anything.
Well, there's a lot of issues that come with standardized testing. When you look at the No Child Left Behind Act that came out in 2001 under the George W. Bush administration, that required a lot of standardized testing, not just to measure the students, but to measure the teachers. And if a teacher was not highly qualified and the students weren't performing well under these standardized tests, then that affected the amount of money that the schools were getting from the government. And basically what it boiled down to is students were not being left behind. When we were in school, if you flunked, you flunked. You did not progress to the next grade. However, under No Child Left Behind, students were passed up without getting those fundamental basics reading and a writing and arithmetic, as my grandmother used to say. And this all played into the standardized testing. And you've seen in the news, you may have read about it on the internet, several teachers in several cities began altering these standardized tests because their jobs depended on this group of students who did not have the basics to pass the test. So here we are now, and I honestly believe that standardized tests are issued because they're easy. They're just easy. You give a child a packet, you give them a Scantron, they read the question, they have to pick one of 4 answers, and you move on. You can use your state-issued laptop, your camera phone even, and you take pictures of all of the exams and everything automatically populates. You give the kid the grade, you move on. And if you've ever taught a class, you know that grading each paper takes a minimum of 2 to 3 minutes. When you've got 35 kids in the elementary school, or you have 150 kids in the high school level, that's a lot of time grading papers.
Yeah, it is.
And so it's hard to require critical thinking on a standardized test because it's standard. And that creates a lot of problems. It really does. And a lot of the students, unfortunately, they don't have the skills and the tools to critically think for a lot of reasons. Some parents are just not involved. They don't care. You have parents who are incarcerated. You have parents who are on drugs. You have parents who are homeless. If a child is not eating, they're not learning.
No.
It's hard to concentrate when your stomach's growling because you haven't eaten since lunch yesterday.
Absolutely.
It's hard to do homework if you don't have electricity. It's hard to do homework if you don't have the internet. I've had students who wrote term papers on their smartphones. That is very difficult to do. And it's tough to grade because you know they've used their smartphone and it's terrible.
Yeah.
You know, you should have found a desktop, but they can't use the library because the library is only open certain hours and they have to take 3 buses to get home.
It's interesting. You talk about the social ramifications impacting the school system. I think policymakers tend to negate the social circumstances that our children are facing. Homelessness, drug abuse, the lack of a stable home environment, not proper nutrition. All these issues are impacting the ability of children to learn, but we disregard that and we kind of believe that once the child comes into a school setting, they're perfect and that they're not influenced by a dysfunctional family life. What do you see are some strategies that could to respond to these issues? What's some things policymakers could do?
Well, they've done a few things that have helped, but I'm not sure what we can do to move further toward our goal than that. For instance, there's free breakfast and free lunch. The problem with free breakfast and free lunch that a lot of people don't understand is a lot of schools will force students into free breakfast and free lunch, even if they do not qualify, because that allows for the school to gain more money. So, I've had students being called out of class so they could go down to the administration office and sign up for free lunch. And they'll tell you, Miss Brownlee, I don't even qualify for this, but they're trying to force me into it because it benefits the school. And fortunately, there are a lot of children who do need it, and it is available, and they are able to eat. The thing is, a lot of the students don't want what is given, and so they'll go get it and then throw it away. Which, from my mind, from a fiscal point of view, it's just wasteful. You force a child to take something who is going to throw it away, but with most government agencies, if you do not use the resources, you lose the resources and you won't have the funding for the next year. Another thing that is done is a lot of schools, specifically inner city schools, they have programs where they allow the students access to clothing closets so they can get clothes. A lot of, specifically the students who are involved in sports or are friendly or close with their PE teachers, the students can use the school's locker rooms to shower. Because if you don't have running water, that's going to become a problem, and that will lead to bullying. I've seen it. So that's another thing that they can do. Schools are also sending children home with food over long weekends and over Christmas break, fall break, spring break, etc. So they have something. It might not be much, but they have something. But then you have to take into account that a lot of students, that's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to have to go and obtain services because everybody wants to be on top. Everyone wants to be perceived as having money, having resources, having the finer things, and not a brown bag peanut butter and jelly sandwich from the school.
Yes.
And you just have to try and balance that. There's no simple answers. There's no easy answer. It's a long-standing problem.
I think one of the issues that you brought up, to me, I think is very important, is the lack of critical thinking on part of students, but also on part of parents.
Yes.
That in the standardization of tests has resulted in cookie cutter approaches, very simplistic approaches to problems that are very complex. And as a result, we're not able to really think out long-term solutions to a lot of issues that's facing us. And I think we see that in the whole political conflict right now that's taking place in this country. How do you see the lack of critical thinking being acted out in the classroom right now?
Oh, heavens. I have plenty of examples. A perfect one was just last week. I was in a classroom. I look young. I enjoy the same music that most of the students do. I dress similarly to what they do. So they're always interested in how old I am. And one student asked me, "Miss, what year did you graduate high school?" I said, "Well, I'm 36. Do the math." He looks at me, he says, 1975. No. 1977. No. Well, my mother is 32 and she graduated in 1977. I said, "Young man, I'm older than your mother. I was not born in 1977. That's not the right answer." And he looks at me, he says, "Oh, well, I meant 1987. I said, "I was 7 in 1987 and I'm older than your mother." Unless she's a certified genius, she did not graduate high school that year. And I'm thinking to myself, I couldn't say it out loud. I was like, obviously you did not get her genes if she is a certified genius. There's a problem here. But that's common. I've been asked, where was I when Kennedy was shot? My mother was in the first grade. I was not even a thought yet. I've also been asked, how old was I when the Civil War happened?
I've been asked that question myself, but I'm greatly older than you are, so.
But even still, being in my 30s, being asked how old was I during the Civil War. And he didn't, when I inquired more, he wasn't talking about the civil rights movement. He meant the North and South, gray and blue. And the critical thinking is just not there. And then when you speak to a lot of the parents, well, let's back up. Parental involvement is very important. Anyone who's ever had a child who's actually been interested in their child's learning, they know they have to be involved to a degree. Mm-hmm. The thing is, the parents who are involved, they're involved. You don't have to worry about their children. Those parents will call you, they will email you, they will show up to the school unannounced. They need to know about how their child is doing. The problem children, it's a problem because their parents aren't around. Mm-hmm. You never hear from them. You send things home, it never gets to them. They don't respond. And when they do respond, you as the teacher is blamed for the child's shortcomings versus the child being held accountable. And you see this as a generational thing now. And you want to ask the parent, well, what are you doing at home to help me help your student? Mm-hmm. How are you creating an environment where your child, my student, can learn? And they say, well, I don't have time for that. Well, I don't have the resources for that. Do you have a table? Is there a place where your student can sit and read? And I've been asked, well, why would I need that? And you just see yourself doing a huge face palm on your forehead because they don't see the connection or the responsibility of the parents, the family, the community, and how this all plays into one another.
And I think that happens a lot of times when you are talking to parents that are very well-meaning, but if they didn't have those things in their life, there were no role models, they don't recognize the role that some of those things play in the education and life of a child.
Correct.
And it's really hard to provide something that you don't even realize is either missing or you don't know how to provide it. So, I think that in our society, we just have a number of social ills that spill over into each other. And sometimes we like to look at things as neat little packages and not realize how connected things are. Because you talked a lot about social issues that teachers now have to deal with that typically you would think a social worker or other people would be dealing with, but all people are whole people, so whoever they are and whatever issues they have in their life, they take them everywhere they go. So they take them into school, into the classroom, just like everywhere else. Correct. So if they don't have good supports at home, or they have a parent that loves them dearly, but they're working multiple jobs to provide even bare minimum, then there might be some lack of adult attention, but not necessarily because parents don't care, but just because life is so hard for people nowadays that all I can do is what I can do. And sometimes it's I have to work multiple jobs to put enough money together to put food on the table, shoes on your feet, and send you to school and trust you to get there because I had to leave before you. All of those things. And I don't necessarily think that it should be a teacher's problem to resolve those things. But I do think as a society, we need to look at a much bigger picture. I think there are problems with how we fund education. But if we also don't fund other types of services for people, it's still going to reflect back into how a person is educated. And too often, I think our government and our community like to keep things segregated. Mm-hmm. Well, the children go to school. So if you get your kids to school, they'll learn. And if they behave, they'll learn. But we don't want to know what's going on at home. We don't want to know if that child only sees their parent 2 hours a day until the weekend. We don't want to know if the child's going hungry. We don't want to know if they're getting ready to be evicted. So the child is thinking about that rather than whatever. So all of those things are tied together. And I think a lot of those things have to be addressed in people's lives. Minimum wage and all of those things to even get to where we can address education and where children are falling out and how children in the U.S. compare to children in other countries. It's not just child goes to school, do your homework, and you learn. It's a big picture.
I believe that often school becomes a catch-all.
I agree.
Oh, yeah.
For dysfunctionality of the society. And one thing that I believe is that we blame the school for not providing adequate social care, but other systems who should be providing that care are falling short. One thing about in Arizona rate really one of the lowest states in the country for education. But yet, we complain because the CPS caseload is so high, Child Protective Service caseload is so high. So to me, the correlation would be, well, maybe it's so high because the educational system is not doing its job, or other supplemental systems are not doing their jobs.
They're definitely intertwined. This is not, none of these things are mutually exclusive. And I find as a teacher, I've become not just an educator, I've become a counselor, I've become a social worker, I've become a bonus parent, I've become the big sister, I've become not just a counselor with emotional issues, but a counselor to help these kids get into college. I found that the counselors on campus are not doing what they're supposed to do.
Well,
so that's a key component from my experience.
Well, working on during college level, what I'm seeing is young people coming to college facing horrendous problems, substance abuse,
yes,
single-headed households, having to work because they're the only income provider in the family, issues where there have been divorce, or the boyfriend is engaged in drugs, or they're engaged in drugs, mental health problems. It's a ton of problems. We think, well, the only thing to do, let's get them in college and then build a future. No, to get them in college, we have to resolve and respond to a wide range of social problems that's really very difficult for any system to respond to.
Correct. And one thing that people pride this society on doing is, well, at least they're not in jail. Because a lot of times that's the pathway. You either go to jail or you go to college.
Yeah.
And so we're so happy that they're not in jail. They're not in the criminal system. But my goodness, they're not getting any help to maintain this collegiate pathway. And it's really sad. But the schools have access to the resources. But when you spoke about funding, Miss Yvonne, I look at it on a couple of different levels. The schools aren't getting the funding they should, and the teachers are definitely not getting the pay that they should. You have an assistant principal making $100,000, an assistant principal, where a teacher who deals with the 150 kids per day is only making $35,000 per year, gets one bathroom break in an 8-hour period, and has to deal with each one of these child's idiosyncrasies. And some of these kids, you would think they were raised by wolves. And trying to balance all of this, it's extremely difficult. And then you have the pressure from the district to make sure everyone is passing, when you just don't have the capacity to instruct, corral, motivate, grade papers, and parent.
What I'd like to do, I know we've been talking about the problems. One thing on this show we try to look at is, what can people of faith do that can respond to this issue?
Not just pray, but they need to show up.
Okay.
You have to show up. I mean, if you have the ability, become a substitute teacher and pour love into these kids, because a lot of these kids do not hear, I love you. They don't hear it. They don't believe that someone could love them, especially a stranger. They don't, it's inconceivable to them. I've had students refer to me as mom. That means the world to me. And I have to show up now. I get their email address and I send them things about colleges. I send them text messages saying, hey, I was thinking about you. Hope you're having a great day. And if more people within the community would do those little things, these kids might actually feel they have a chance.
I just want to clarify one thing. We were talking about not just loving your children, your grandchildren, your cousins, but the little boy, little girl who lives in your community, or who may not live in the community, but who needs someone of love and somebody stable in their lives. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. And I mean, sometimes we've all had these experiences with random people who tell us a word for the day that was right on time in due season. You may or may not ever see this person again, but it made an impact in that moment. And that's what a lot of these kids need.
Scripture talk about being a light in the world. Too often we have limited that to being a light in my family.
Yes, I agree.
And maybe being a light in the world is going forth to those children, the most vulnerable among us, to show that we care for them and that they are of value. Because even on college level, I'm running across a lot of students who never was told that they have worth or have potential. And they're 20, 21, 22 years old. So we have to be very intentional from this point on about telling our children and those children around us that they are loved and they have potential, and we are praying for them and with them.
I agree. And not just that, we need to be an example. Like show them, not just show them to do it, but show them how to do it. Okay. Those are the steps that they're missing. We need to bridge that gap into this is what you do and this is how you go about it, and I can help you.
Okay. Yvonne, do you have something to say as we
No, just as you were saying some of that, it just made me think about how important words are. And we kind of fling them around and not really think about it. But even thinking back in my own childhood, I can really think about how many times I was told positive things versus just careless negative things that were just thrown out there in a minute. And those things are internalized. And then as you get older, you continue to believe those negative things. And so often we're very quick to say something negative or put a person down, not thinking that we're putting that in that person's very spirit and their soul. And that we need to be real cognizant of what we say and, how we say it to encourage people, and just really think about what we're saying.
So maybe what we need to do this week is pray for our children. And if you know one child, just to take them aside and say, we love you and we support you. Thank you, Shai.
Thank you.
Thank you,
It's
Yvonne.
a pleasure. Thank you.
May God be with you.
Amen.